Welcome to the dungeon. Dum dum dum. What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? And this is episode number 12 of season 1. And in this episode, I wanted to continue the conversation that I started in episode 11, where I talked about the fact that Andy ghosted me and how I feel about it in general. So, based on that episode, something that I asked specifically in that episode is for the community, the listeners, the people that have been supporting us throughout this journey to share their opinions, to share their opinion on what the situation was, their opinion on how I handled it, and how I'm going to continue handling it, all of that. And that request has left some interesting, great, encouraging comments, and it has led to some really incredible conversations. Now, before I go on, if you haven't listened to episode 11 yet, I highly suggest going back and listen to it because I'm not going to recap, okay? We're going to dive straight into it. And that means that if you haven't listened to it, like if you don't know what's going on, go back and listen. You got this. And yeah, let's start by saying, okay, the general consensus so far, every single person has told me that it is a great idea for me to continue with the podcast, which I think is a very beautiful thing. One person in particular told me that she would love for me to continue with the podcast, but she might not always be interested in all the hosts that I bring on. And that's fair, I think. I will try my best to bring the people that I think will resonate with me and the audience, because, if I think somebody boring, I'm not going to show up. Like, that's a hard ask. So I'm not going to bring anybody that I think is boring, but I hope y'all don't think they're boring either. And I hope that you will enjoy them as much as I enjoy them, because I'm not bringing in strangers either. I'm going to bring people that I know is going to bring the dungeon level. Yeah, what you're used to. But obviously from their perspective, because as I said, nobody is Andy and Andy is irreplaceable, right? So that's positive. Going back to the fact that I said that Andy is irreplaceable. One thing that I realized is one of the reasons why it was so hard for me to talk about what happened and to share about it publicly, besides the whole thing of, airing dirty laundry or feeling that way, is also that I acknowledged publicly that I don't have access to my friend. And that all of a sudden made me start reminiscing on the good times we've had together. And publishing that episode was hard because after we publish an episode, it's always like a banter between us of, yeah, this person said this and that person said that. And we had so many people that listened. Like, that's what Andy and I do. And then I looked back at the little clips we made, the reels. If you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, I create like these little reels of every episode. Well, I started at some point. And I looked at those and I'm like, gosh, man, we had such really good time. And I don't know if he saw it or don't see it, but I did send him a message. I was like, gosh, I really miss you. Because I do. And it doesn't matter what's, I don't know what's going on, but whatever it is, fact of the matter is, I miss my friend, right? That's the truth. Um, but then there were a lot of people, like going back to what the community had to say, the dungeon community, the dungeoneers, to what the dungeoneers had to say. People had their speculations as well as to why Andy hasn't responded to me. Let me see which one I'll start first. Actually, there's two that people thought of. One that a few people messaged me about, and some people in my close group said as well, is there's probably something that is hard to talk about that he's not ready to talk about. And then he didn't talk about it, right? And that might be it. Honestly, I would absolutely love for that to be the truth, because that means that he's okay mentally and physically. There's just something that he can't or won't or don't want to talk about. And I'm better off that way than something is wrong with him, right? The other thing that someone brought up that I thought was pretty interesting is that oftentimes in the Caribbean, we find it easier to just say nothing and then to say what we really want to say. Whenever it's hard, we just like quiet down and not talk about it instead of facing it. And it's interesting because I'm all about facing it. This podcast is all about facing it. It's about not keeping things a secret. So again, this is a speculation. You know, I can't say what's actually happening. But what I can say is I had a really good conversation with this person about this subject, because I love to look at where things come from, right? It's super cool to say, or it's super easy to say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. That's so wrong. But I love to look at things with so much more compassion than that. And to look at what could possibly be the core of things. Because once you get to the root, the core of something, and you destroy something right there, then everything else changes, right? Like, this is even seen in our DNA, right? If you have a couple from a certain race that is having children and it's all within a race, and if you just change one of the races in that bloodline, everything else changes from there on, right? And the more you do that, the more things change. So yeah, the conversation of we don't like to face things and we just stay quiet instead of saying what's going on, it sparked a really good conversation with this person. The picture that came into my mind once he said that was the area of like borrowing money. Because it's a thing, right? Where people will borrow money, they won't have a way to pay it, and then they just stay quiet. They won't talk about it. They won't find another way. They'll just stay quiet. That's the example that came. And just that thought of that, there's like so much more we can talk about in that regards, but we're not going to in this episode. What I did want to highlight is the conversation that I had with this dungeoneer from Belize, a friend of mine from Belize. And he was saying that, I was saying this can definitely stem from transatlantic slavery. You know what I mean? Like, their communication wasn't really celebrated or allowed. Just think of all the creative ways enslaved people had to communicate. They had to like whisper. They had dances in order for them to communicate. And in Curacao, we have the tambu. That was definitely like they would act as if they're partying, but truth is they were like plotting and having full blown conversations, and also kind of singing their frustrations with what's happening. And that still happens today. People sing about their frustrations with the society in Curacao in general, or they'll sing about the government and all the shit that happened. Um, so those creative forms of communication. Oh, another one is braiding their hair, right? In order to communicate something. So all these creative forms of communication came from the fact that enslaved people were not able to communicate. So communication was technically something that was stolen from us. And now we gotta find a way to rekindle that. So every time somebody that comes from a background of transatlantic slavery chooses to communicate instead of not communicate, that's a revolution in itself. However small it is, that's a revolution in itself. So that was a really great connection that we made having this conversation. But another connection that I made after that was that if you are enslaved, right, these are like brutal, horrible situations. Even the little things that you have to communicate is more bad news than good news. And I'm not going to say like there was no good news or that our people did not find a way to celebrate, because they did. And that celebration was resistance. And I think we should talk about that. But I can also say that once you have delivered so much bad news in a row, there's a fatigue that comes with it. Right. And so that might also be the root cause of this whole silencing and not communicating things when it's hard news or uncomfortable things that we have to communicate. So I thought that was a very interesting conversation. But even beyond that, right, as human beings, like right now, not even looking at history or anything like that, as human beings, sometimes we don't have the words to communicate what we want to communicate. It just is. And over this weekend, I've had an experience where I've had a lot of feelings come up. A lot of feelings, but I had no way to communicate it. I'm not going to go into the details because it's not that important. I might go into the details in the future podcast episodes. But it was just like so much emotions and no way, no words to articulate what was happening. So all that could be a case and could be a reason. And those are all just speculations, right? Because I have not spoken to Andy still, and I haven't heard a peep from him. On another note, I spoke with somebody who is going to be the co-host of the podcast. And she brought up something in regards to secrets and the Caribbean, okay, that I think are very interesting. After I tell this story and after I say everything I want to say, I will introduce this person's name, but we're going to have an episode for sure where you get to know this person better. The idea so far is that this episode will air on Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. If you're listening like way in the future, now you know what day it aired. That's the plan. And that the episode, that season 2 then will start on the Monday after, which I don't really know what day it is. It's going to be the 3rd, I believe, 3rd of June. June 3rd. And that's when season 2 will start. And we're going to shift the publishing date from a Wednesday to a Monday. Okay. That's me getting ahead of myself. But this person that is going to be my next co-host, she shared a passage from the book Women Who Run with the Wolves. And I'm going to read it and then I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on what we talked about. She said, or not she said, the book says, while some secrets are strengthening, for instance, those used as part of a strategy in order to gain a competitive goal, or those happy ones kept just for the pleasure of savoring them, the secrets of shame are very different. As different as a bare-boned metal versus a bloody knife. The latter must be brought up, witnessed by compassionate humans under generous conditions. When a woman keeps a shameful secret, it is horrifying to see the enormous amounts of self-blame and self-torture she endures. All the blame and torture that were promised to descend upon the woman if she tells the secret does so anyway. Even though she has told no one, it all attacks her from within. And so she brought that up based on what I talked about in the last episode about in Caribbean culture as not talking about things and keeping secrets, keeping family secrets, keeping relationship secrets, keeping friendship secrets, keeping secrets from ourselves, which sometimes, not all the time, then creates a culture of lying, telling all these white lies about how things are. Now, I'm not saying this from a space of judgment, right? I'm saying this from a space of those secrets, they eat up at you from the inside. And in the last episode, I talked about it in regards to shoving things under the rug, right? But it's true. These secrets, they eat us up on the inside and they allow us to stay small and to stay where we are and not to break generational things that has held us back. People often talk about generational curses. I don't really like to talk about it that way. I like to talk about it more as in generational patterns that has held us back. And so if we do not talk about it, we don't get liberated. And so for me, this idea, this thing that Andy did not speak with me, or hasn't spoken to me, it felt like this secret. And honestly, I could not see that it was eating me up on the inside, right? Like we don't actually feel that. We often don't feel like, ooh, I kept a secret and now it's eating me up on the inside. No, we don't. It's just there. It's just a secret you kept. And the more you get into the habit of keeping secrets, the more secrets you keep, right? And what was interesting about sharing what I shared on the last episode is afterwards, I felt liberated. I felt on top of the world. I felt productive. I felt loved. I felt supportive. But I also felt really, really sad, as I mentioned before. I really like the grieving process was also going a little bit deeper because all of a sudden I made a podcast episode on the dungeon without the person that was supposed to be there. And so it's all very interesting because there is a liberation that happens, but I also do not want to diminish the fact that there's also, it's not all positive or it doesn't feel all positive in the moment. But at the same time, going through that sadness which I still feel from time to time, not having my friend, is still healing, you know? It's healing. And it heals me. It heals the pain that was caused because of this. But what's interesting about healing is once we heal one pain, we also heal other pains. You know, and I can't tell you exactly like, oh my God, it healed all these pain in my life. I can't tell you right now, but I do know that once we heal something, we heal other things simultaneously. That's the beauty of healing. So sharing this little secret, quote unquote, has allowed me to feel so much empowered in myself, in my body, in who I am. But it also allowed me to be supported by the community. I don't know how many messages I've gotten after the episode, but it was around 10, right? Of different people, different views. Great conversations, including the passage that I just read about secrets. And that brings me so much joy. Now, it might look different for different people. People might get different things from different, that's, everybody's different. But for me, that brought me so much joy, and it felt like a load was lifted from me. So there's so much power in not keeping secrets that are eating away at us, and especially secrets that has to do with shame. Now, another thing that this lady brought, who is going to be our next co-host, or my co-host, she said that secrets also keep us away from celebration. Because the shame eats up at you from the inside and you can't fully celebrate things. Right? And in this instance, if I use that terminology onto what happened with this podcast, once I released the last episode, I was able to once again celebrate this platform, celebrate this community of Dungeoneers. I think that might be the name that I call it. I would love to hear what you think. What you think? You like the name Dungeoneer? Does it have a negative meaning in English? I'll have to look at that up. The word don't mean nothing to me, but it might be something horrible. If it's fuck you in another language, tell me. And I didn't mean it that way. Anyways, yeah, I got to celebrate the community we've created, and I got to be celebrated by that community. And that right there is a very, very beautiful thing, if I say so myself. Anyway, without further ado, I would like to say that the next co-host for the dungeon is going to be Miss Charisse Levon. She is a bright light in the world. I've chosen her because she's open and ready to have dungeon level conversations. She is a friend. We have those conversations already. And also, I think it is a great transition from who Andy is and who Andy has been on this podcast to her. Again, Andy could never be replaced. I'll keep repeating that, whatever, because that's the truth. He can't be replaced. But there are some similarities in that Charisse is also Jamaican. There isn't a similarity in regards to gender because she identifies as a woman and Andy's a man. So that's different. There's also the religious aspect, like coming from religious trauma that we both have. That is a conversation that Andy and I have had on the podcast. So I thought those similarities would make it a very great transition from Andy to her. Obviously, as I said, it's going to be completely different, but we trying here. We trying. So I hope that you love her. I hope that you love her as much as I love her. Full disclosure, we've already recorded the first episode. Before I recorded this. So I already know that the first episode is going to be epic and is going to be amazing. So be on the lookout for that. It's going to be on the Monday after this episode drops. And I believe that's June 3rd. Let me check. Give me a moment here. All right. Yes, it is June 3rd. June 3rd is the drop of season 2 of the Dungeon podcast with co-host Charisse Levon. Be on the lookout for that. I would love to hear your feedback. Spotify is like our main platform. There, please comment, share your thoughts, vote on the polls. I put a poll most of the time. And leave a review, right? But we're also on Apple Podcasts, Alexa, YouTube. We everywhere. So feel free to follow us, review us, and let us know what you think, right? If the platform that you're listening on does not have a place to comment, then feel free to hit me up on social media, Facebook and Instagram. I check those. You can find me at Hey Sheedia, and that is Hey, hey, SHEEDIA, Sheedia. All right, that's it for season 1. It's a wrap, y'all. Stay tuned for season 2 coming at you in just a couple of days. Bye-bye.